Well, I mean, definitely what I said earlier of really looking at what already exists in your community and like not just like, oh, well, I've never heard of someone doing this. It's like, no, you really need to like dig in. Most cities have nonprofit councils of some sort, or like really dig in and see who is at least serving the demographic of people that you want to serve, and what are they already doing with them, and can you partner with them on adding something to those services.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com and grab some time with us to chat. Now, today we have another great guest on the podcast, Costanza Raider. And Costanza grew up in a musical family. So when she was about 13 years old, she also had leukemia and figured out that arts was a important tool for her to cope with the illness. And during that, or later on, also had an opportunity to move from California to Texas and study music and psychology in college. After graduating, went to do musical theater as an actress and was a music instructor for a while. And during that, volunteered as an oncology unit in the hospital. And there weren't a lot of activities for adults in the oncology unit. And saw that the patients were suffering needlessly. Decided to sign up for patients to lift them up. Started a nonprofit and saw an opportunity for artists to share their different things and help with those units. So, with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast.
Thanks. I mean, that's my story. I think I'm done. We're good.
Hey, it's always a good it's always good to get a nutshell. Now we're going to go and back it. So I just condensed a much longer journey into about 30 or 40 seconds.
That was pretty impressive, actually.
I do what I can. So with that, let's go back a bit in time to where your journey started, which was growing up in a musical family and also having to deal with at a younger age with leukemia, and how that got your journey going.
Yeah, my mom was really musical. She was a singer, and we did performances and shows with different groups as a family growing up. That was a big part of my childhood. And we had a piano, and from a, like, I don't know, barely able to stand up, I was pulling myself up and playing on the piano in our home. And little did I know that was going to be kind of what I did the rest of my life, and would also be the thing that would um, heal me later on as I faced challenges throughout my life. Grew up in a musical family in California, was diagnosed with leukemia at 13. I had 130 weeks of chemotherapy. So most of my high school time was dealing with cancer. And I was fortunate in a lot of ways, like you mentioned in the introduction, because I had access to the arts when I would go in to the clinic for infusions, when I was admitted to the hospital. There was always someone coming by trying to like cheer me up or do coloring pages with me, or fill in the blank, whatever it was. There's so many resources actually that get thrown at supportive services for pediatric oncology patients, which, as it should be, like it's a really challenging thing for patients and their families to go through. But when I graduated from college, and I should let you know, I have been cancer free since 2002. So almost 20 years. Whoa, it's it's a long time. um, I went on to study music and psychology in school, like you said. And in San Antonio, I started volunteering on an adult oncology unit and saw that there it was very different than the environment that I was in when I was treated. And a lot of the patients that I worked with weren't much older than I was when I finished treatment. And yet they were alone for long stretches of time, whereas I was never alone when I was in the hospital. But I mean, if you think about it, especially young adults, like they often have like young families. And so someone has to stay home to take care of the kids or keep working so that you can still have insurance and all those issues. Um, so yeah, a lot of the patients lived in the hospital for weeks and months at a time. And the boredom, anxiety, depression, isolation was it's deadly in a place like that. And if it's not addressed, patient outcomes suffer. That's well established in the research that that these psychosocial issues impact our body's ability to heal. It influences the rate that tumors and cancers grow in our bodies, actually. And yet we're still really lagging in supportive services, especially for the adult population, which is the vast majority of people that are in hospitals, are adults. And so yeah, started singing for patients, and it just that little bit of bringing that little bit of beauty and human connection into a place like that is, it was transformative and
No,
incredibly powerful. And my patients usually cry, good tears, and just begged for more. And they wanted things that I didn't know how to do. And so I started, my
no,
nonprofit so that we could,
now let me just jump in because the
yeah, go ahead.
nonprofit, because you were at the time, if I remember right in our conversation, so backing up this or journey just a bit. So you got the degree in music psychology, but before you kind of started the nonprofit, you were also worked as a actress for a period of time, or musical theater actress,
Hmm.
and then went to music instructor. So help us understand a bit of that journey. Was this, did you start volunteering while you were doing those, or did you do those first for a while and then start volunteering, or kind of what was that portion of the journey?
Yeah, that's always a tricky thing. How do you go from your day job to your dream job, right? When you're an entrepreneur.
Right.
So yeah, and not that the work I did previous wasn't fun and I loved it. Yeah, um, I did a lot of performance, after college, and started a voice studio, which is my like other love. Just absolutely love, when people come into my studio, especially those that have been told that they can't sing, or because that they have some sort of wounding around their voice and around their creativity, and to create safe space for them to explore and learn and build skills and build confidence, in their voices. When you change the voice, you affect the whole person. When you free up the voice, you free up the whole person, and it's it's addicting to watch it happen and to get to be a part of that process. So I was actively doing all those things for many years while I was volunteering. And initially, I was volunteering very occasionally, and I would bring castmates in to do little performances on the units. And I would bring friends to come and, play and sing with me. And that was really fun. But as it went on, I just really felt this strong sense that this is really what I want to do with my life. This is my favorite place to perform. Like, I don't like on stage is great, and I love the camaraderie of theater. It's such a that's its own healing process um to do theater and be part of performing groups like that. But the level of fulfillment and impact that I saw through the work in the hospital there was just no comparison to it. So yeah, I was doing both for a long period of time, and slowly did more and more
No,
and
and
more.
how long, when you say long period of time, was this a space over 1 year, 5 years, 20 years? How long was you kind of doing the volunteering on the side, doing it as kind of a, hey, I want to get back, or want to, I've been
Yeah.
through this experience and I want to help others. How long was that period of time where you're kind of volunteering as you were working the full-time day job?
I started volunteering in 2009, and I started my organization in 2016. So there's a good chunk of time. And some of that too was the emotional hurdles that I had to overcome, because when I would go into the hospital, it would trigger some of my own trauma that wasn't fully resolved yet. And I I would sometimes call my mom on the way to the hospital, like crying, like on the edge of a panic attack. And she's like, just breathe. Like she'd talk me through it. And
Mhm.
because she knew that I really wanted to be there and it was making an impact. Um, but it was still really hard. So I couldn't do it as often as I wanted to, even with the other job. There was some emotional stuff I had to get through first. And so I had a really lovely uh, mental breakdown in 2012, which it's actually pretty common in survivors. About 10 years out, there's often this resurgence of our this emergence of all this um, trauma that's kind of locked in implicit memories that kind of bubbles to the surface, and then it's like, okay, you're in a safe place now. Now you get to deal with all this junk.
Mhm.
So got some really great therapy, and as I got through that, I really felt like, okay, I'm free from all of that. Now I can really be present and serve in this way that I want to serve. Um, so yeah.
No, I think that definitely makes sense. Now, so as you're doing that, so you're working the full-time day job, you did the volunteering. It sounds like, from about 2009 to 2016, you're basically working as an actress and you're working and coaching others and helping them and doing the, instructions and that. And then it sounds like, and putting words in your mouth, so you can correct me where I'm wrong, that 2016, you decided to make the non-for-profit a more full-time endeavor, or kind of what was the transition from going part-time, kind of doing this as a volunteer work on the side while supporting yourself, to saying, hey, this is really where my passion is, this is what I'd like to focus on. And I know I'm asking a compound question, so I apologize. The other part of to that is, what was the kind of the trigger to say, hey, I've had enough of this, or I've had it, or I want not had enough in a bad way, but I really want to make this my full-time focus. And what was kind of what that trigger that said, okay, now I'm going to make that leap?
What was the inciting incident? In my story, yeah, let's start there because that was a year or so before I started my organization. I met this patient, one of our young adult patients, and her name is Gracie. I have permission to tell her story, which I'm very grateful to her husband for. Um, and I met Gracie like the day after she was diagnosed with cancer, and she was early 20s. She was far from home. She was about 3 hours away from her hometown. And when I first went in to work with her, she was sitting in a ball, huddled in a ball in her bed, and just really flat affect. And I went in and introduced myself and said, hey, do you want to hear some music? And she's like, well, I'm not really like an artsy person. I don't even really listen to music. So, maybe not today. And I was like, okay, that's fine. We're never mad when people say no. It's the no is as part of the therapeutic aspect of it. It all centers around giving patients choice. And that's something that she could say no to that day. But then before I left, she stopped me and she's like, well, actually, if you know a Christian song, I feel like I really need to hear that right now. Um, and so I sang, I don't know if you know the old song, his eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. And I
That's much better than I'd ever seen, so that was awesome.
that's why they pay me the big bucks. Not really. But yeah, as I sang through the verses of the song, I just watched the tension melt from her body and tears come to her eyes. And when I finished, she just looked up and said, thank you. And I actually got to work with Gracie a lot over the months she was in the hospital. She lived in the hospital for 6 months while she was receiving treatment. They couldn't discharge her because of the way her insurance was. They wouldn't be able to readmit her to finish treatment. So they had to keep her in the hospital, and she was alone a lot. And I worked, but her favorite day was Wednesday because I would come in. That was my day to come and play music. And we had a group for young adults with cancer on the unit at the hospital, and we would play music and share stories. And we just had a great time connecting with each other. And she did finally get to. We did finally get her in remission, and she finally got to go home. We were super excited for her. But just a few months later, she was back in the hospital because her cancer was back. And this time, as soon as I found out, I went to her room and expecting devastation because this is like the worst nightmare for a survivor. And this time I found her sitting on her bed, smiling. I was confused. And she's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're here. I want to show you something." And she pulled me over to her bed and she rolled up her sleeve, and there was a brand new tattoo of a sparrow that she had designed herself, that she had gotten as soon as she got out of the hospital. And she said, "I'll never forget that first song you sang for me. And I know now that no matter what happens, that he is watching over me."
That's awesome.
And of course, I lost my mind and just cried for 3 days. Like you do. And then, unfortunately they weren't able to get her cancer back in remission. But before she went home on hospice, she called me to her room again and she grabbed my face and she said, "We need more. We need more art and music. We need more reasons to get out of our rooms and out of our isolation, because we need to remember the reasons why we're alive as much as we need the things that keep us alive." She made it very clear that while she appreciated that I was there once a week, that it wasn't enough and that there were many patients that would come after her that needed more. And she said, "You got to do something about this." And I was like, "Yes, ma'am." um, and it had already been an idea forming for a while, but she really gave me the kick in the pants to say, you got to take action now. And so I did the research to Googled how to start a nonprofit and, did a lot of research on other arts and health programs like ours that do bring the arts into hospitals. Like how do people do this and all of that, and then started my nonprofit in 2016, and we hired our first visual artist the next month.
Well, that's awesome. No, that's a great story, and certainly is heartwarming. And it's something that comes out of a loss, but also gives you an opportunity to serve others and kind of make that the transition of that full time focus. So
Yeah.
now, as you've done that, as you put that as more and hey, we're going to do this as a full time focus and really make it the endeavor you're going to do. I don't know a ton about nonprofits. I've worked with some and I know some, but I've never dived into that very deeply. But is that generally the model is you're continually going around trying to fundraise, trying to get people to donate and otherwise doing it. And a lot of them tend to not make it very long just because you're having to continually get donors and get people that are willing to contribute on a regular basis. So as you're getting that up and going, and almost have to focus a bit on the, not just the mission, which is definitely important, but also a bit more on kind of the business related side. How did that go for you? Was it something where you're able to get people that saw the vision and really, bought into it and where they're supported? Was the hospitals on board? Kind of how did all of that go for you?
That's a great question, because it is, there's not really, I think, a straight line of, or like template that really any nonprofit founder necessarily follows. Like each kind of takes their own path to, get to stability. Like what's kind of the goal is to, have stability so that you can continue to execute your mission in perpetuity, that it's not just this like one-time thing, because a lot of nonprofits do fail within the first 3 to 5 years.
Mhm.
So the second part of the question you asked previously was that transition between my other job and then the work I do now. And the first 3 years of the organization, I didn't take a salary. I employed artists, and because it's a core part of our values is providing economic opportunities for creatives, because they're generally underemployed. And it takes very skilled artists to do this work, and so they should be paid for the work that they do. It's also an issue of equity too, because if your nonprofit is only run by volunteers, then only people that can afford to volunteer can be part of the mission, and that won't necessarily be a group of people that reflects the diversity of the people that you're serving. So we have artists on our team that they couldn't afford to volunteer, but they're some of our most valuable artists, because they can connect with a demographic of people that we serve that I might not be able to connect with, or someone else. That's just like a little side piece. A lot of people think nonprofits like, oh, like it's all volunteer, no one's making money. And yes, volunteer work is an important piece of nonprofits. I don't want to totally negate volunteering. But for this type of work, it's really important to pay our artists. That was a priority. And in nonprofits, a lot of nonprofit founders, well, let me back up. If you are a person thinking of starting a nonprofit, please don't until you really search and make sure there's no one else in your area that is serving the people that you want to serve, or is doing something related. Because it's much easier to partner with an existing nonprofit to fill a need that you see in your community, or to augment what someone's doing, because it's a big drain on resources to create a separate nonprofit. I ended up deciding to start a nonprofit because there wasn't anyone in my community that was doing what I knew needed to be done. And nonprofit founders generally are on the founding board as well. And when you're a board member, you can't be paid, or it's not good practice to be a paid staff member and the board, because the board employs the executive director essentially. So you would be your own boss, and you're not getting those checks and balances. So I didn't take any salary for the first 3 years. So I was still teaching. And each year I slowly knocked off a few of my students as my workload increased. But the only reason I was able to do that is because of my husband. And I do want to acknowledge him, and the fact that like I went to him and I was like, I'm quitting my job, or I'm like cutting down on students. And he's like, yeah, do it. This is what you're supposed to be doing. Like, we can make this work, and go for it. So the organization wouldn't exist without him. And he was our first and largest donor, was my husband, because he let me donate huge chunks of my time and my economic potential, if you will. But eventually we were able to transition into, recruiting enough board members so I could exit the board and could start drawing a salary and devote more of my time to the nonprofit. So yeah, it's a lot of people are like, oh, I want to start a nonprofit so I can get paid to do this work that I want to do. And it's going to be a long road if that's your goal. And anyway, so there's a lot to unpack in this topic. Well, there's so many directions you can go, but I will say the thing that gave me an advantage is, my aunt happens to be one of the top persuasive communication experts in the world. And I learned from her, how to do that, how to weave in storytelling and create persuasive presentations, so that we were able to build our donor base a lot quicker than we would have otherwise. Because I could explain to people in a way that connected with them, so they could see what we were trying to do, and they could see the part that they could play in achieving this vision that I had. So,
well, no, that's definitely an awesome journey, and sounds like, as what I think a lot to do with whether it's nonprofit or a startup or a for-profit business. You're going to have a lot of the same things of making a sustainable model, something that people are willing to purchase or donate or contribute to, and figuring out how to do that is definitely always a journey, and sounds like certainly no exception here. So we could go on, and I'm sure for a lot more, and it'd be fun to have you maybe come back on in the future and talk a little bit more specifically about nonprofits and some of the thoughts and the pointers and people if they're looking to get into that. So we'll have to have you back on there at some point. But as we do wrap up this episode, I always ask 2 questions at the end of each podcast. We'll go ahead and jump to those now. So the first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made, and what did you learn from it?
So the answer to this actually involves IP. So I feel like this is perfect for your podcast. It ended up being okay. Well, I'll just tell the story. So did you watch series of unfortunate? No, wait, that's not it. Oh my gosh, what is the name of that show that was on Netflix with Count Olaf and the children. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do.
Series of unfortunate
I think it's
events,
a
right?
series of unfortunate events. I think that's the right name.
Okay, I did get it right. In one of the episodes, a few years ago when it was first coming out, there's an episode of where they show people going into the hospital is like singing and like trying to cheer up patients. And it's just this parody on the work that we do. And it was so funny. And I sent it and it was intended to be kind of disparaging about that, but I thought it was hilarious. So I sent it to my team and they're like, this is amazing. We should try to do this art, like do our own version of this. And so we started putting together a script, and we found a photographer, like a videographer, and we were getting into it, and we were, recording it and on location at the hospital. Anyway, this whole thing. And then we were like halfway through it and we're like, I don't think what we're doing is enough parody to consider this fair use. And we're gonna have to scrap this whole project because we're just recreating what they did. And like maybe it would have been okay, but we're an arts organization. That's a bad look.
Ripping off giving the appearance that you're ripping off other people's art might be a bit of a problem.
Right. So we sunk a lot of time into that project before we stopped it. But we ended up having this whole blooper reel that we played for our staff at the Christmas party that year. And so we all had a really great laugh about that blooper. It was a blooper reel of a blooper. It was fun.
Well, there you go. That is a good mistake. It's one where I get, because that is a fine line to walk between parody and what's fair use and what's not. And then you pile on top of that, you are an arts organization where it's going to come off looking even worse for you if you don't do it right. And so definitely is one that makes sense as to how you go down that road and how you might make that mistake. But they're definitely fun to hear.
We got our excitement got ahead of us, but yes. Go ahead.
I understand. So no, I was going to jump to now the second question I always ask, which is if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or small business, and maybe we'll shift the question just a little bit to say a nonprofit startup or small business, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Well, I mean, definitely what I said earlier of really looking at what already exists in your community, and like not just like, oh, well, I've never heard of someone doing this. It's like, no, you really need to like dig in. Most cities have nonprofit councils of some sort, or like really dig in and see who is at least serving the demographic of people that you want to serve, and what are they already doing with them, and can you partner with them on adding something to those services. So that's the first one. We have too many nonprofits, and it lessens the effectiveness of the sector in general at attacking some of the world's biggest problems that we're trying to address as an industry. And second, I would say a lot of people come to service work because they're trying to fix something in themselves, where I need, and that was, part of my journey too, of starting with, okay, this is something that I had and I needed and people I knew needed. And so there's a piece of me that needed to get healed in the process. And that was a really important process of stepping over, like doing something for myself versus really looking clearly at the person I say I'm trying to serve, and asking brutal questions. Am I actually accomplishing the goal that I say I want? Because and I experienced this a lot as a kid. There were so many people that wanted to help me, that needed to help me. They needed me to respond in a particular way so that they felt validated for doing something good or whatever it is. And me as the recipient did not feel that didn't feel good. Right? Because that's putting extra burden on me when I'm already in a vulnerable, tough place. So you got to do the tough inner heart work and ask yourself, why do I want to serve? And that place is often a starting point for something good, but you got to clear out your own ego stuff and get those needs met elsewhere. So you're not overburdening the people that you're trying to serve with your own stuff.
No, and I think that's a great takeaway, and it sounds like, not an area I'm as familiar with as far as doing it myself, but it certainly seems like, a lot of times when you're going to go through the passion of doing a nonprofit and doing something that is a much more of a kind of in a giving in nature, you're going to have to make or find that balance so that it doesn't get overwhelmed with other those additional things. So I think
Well,
that's definitely a great takeaway.
and just real quick for small businesses too, I think sometimes we get, as an entrepreneurs, we get attached to certain ideas, and lose sight of, because entrepreneurship is service too. We're finding needs and trying to address needs, but sometimes we get attached to our own ideas or how we think something should go or look or should look and we lose focus of who we're trying to serve, and then we're frustrated because they don't get it or whatever the reason is. How can we as entrepreneurs really connect empathetically with people we're trying to serve, so that we are addressing real needs.
No, I think that's definitely a great takeaway and good advice. So now, as we wrap up the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to connect up with you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to donate, they want to be an investor, they want to be an employee, they want to be an artist that works for you, or they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, or find out more?
Sure. Well, I highly recommend going to our website, heartsneedart.org. If you're interested in learning more about this field of arts and health and how the arts impact our health and why, like what is the mechanisms behind that, check out our podcast. It's called Arts for the Health of It, and it's on all the podcast platforms. And you can learn more from researchers and artists and all the amazing people that we get to talk to. Also on our website, you can browse our artists that we employ, and actually you can choose one to support. So if you find one that connects with you, that you want to support on a monthly basis, then you get monthly messages of stories of impact that they made in the hospital because of your gift. And it's a really cool way to kind of stay connected to this mission and to support this mission. And now that we're serving virtually in addition to in person, our resources are available for any caregivers or patients out there, survivors, that you can access on our website. Click on the virtual resources, and you can actually make appointments directly with our artists. And there's no experience necessary. We're there to have a good time and hold space with you as you explore your expressive and creative voice.
Awesome. Well, I think that's definitely some great resources. Definitely encourage people to connect up, and whether it's donate, whether it's you or share their talents or any other way, definitely a great mission and a great thing to support. So with that, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been it's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you, the listeners, if you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. So just feel free to go to inventiveguest.com and apply to be on the show. Also, as a listener, make sure to click subscribe, share, review, because we want to make sure that everybody finds out about all of these awesome episodes. And last but not least, if you ever need help with patents, trademarks, or anything else with your business, just go to strategymeeting.com and grab some time with us to chat. Well, thank you again, Costanza, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you for having me.